Stop. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now, let's go. I started with a locked door. Emily never locked the bathroom door. Never. But that night, as I walked past on my way to grab a drink from the kitchen, I heard the soft click of the lock turning. Something about that tiny sound set off an alarm deep in my gut. I stopped, listened. The shower was running, but I could hear muffled whispers, not clear enough to make out the words, but just enough to tell that she wasn't talking to herself. I should have walked away, should have ignored it, but my feet wouldn't move. Instead, I stood there, heart hammering in my chest, straining to hear more. The whispering stopped abruptly. Then, a few seconds later, the sound of water splashing, a hurried movement, panic. Emily never rushed in the shower either. She took her time, enjoyed it. Something was wrong. The thought hit me before I could stop it. She wasn't alone. No, that was insane. I was being paranoid, right? My mind scrambled for explanations. For something, anything that would make this normal. Maybe she was on the phone. But who the hell takes a phone call in the shower? And why would she lock the door? I backed away, moving quietly to the bedroom. My hands were ice cold, but my face burned. My throat was dry. My brain kept screaming at me to stop, to wait, to think. But my body was already in motion, already reaching for her phone on the nightstand. The screen was still on. And that's when my world cracked open. A text, just one. But it was enough to detonate everything I thought I knew about my wife. Last night was unforgettable. I can still feel you on me. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I stared at the message, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. My ears rang. My hands clenched so tight around the phone that my fingers ached. It was from someone named Nick, a name I didn't recognize. I scrolled up, half hoping, half dreading what I'd find. The conversation wasn't long. Just a few messages, but the way they spoke, casual, comfortable, familiar, told me this wasn't new. Emily, you're insane. It was just one night. Don't get clingy. Nick, one night. You think I believe that? Emily, you should. Nick, I should also believe you didn't moan my name like a desperate little. I couldn't read anymore. My pulse pounded in my skull. A slow, sickening realization crawled through my bones. My wife had cheated on me. And she hadn't even tried to hide it. The bathroom door opened. Emily stepped out, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping onto the carpet. She froze when she saw me standing there, her phone in my hand. For a second, just one fleeting second, something flashed across her face. Not guilt, annoyance, like I was the one inconveniencing her. What the hell are you doing with my phone? She snapped. I lifted my eyes to meet hers. And for the first time in our entire relationship, I saw her clearly. No rose-colored glasses, no excuses, just a woman who had just been caught standing there in a towel, scowling at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. I took a slow step forward, held up the screen, let her read her own words. I watched her face carefully. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp, or she just stared at it. And then in the coldest, most detached voice I had ever heard come out of her mouth, she said, "You shouldn't go through my stuff." A short laugh, sharp, humorless, escaped my throat. "That's all you have to say." Emily exhaled heavily, rolling her eyes. Jesus met. It was a mistake. It meant nothing. My entire body went rigid. A mistake, she shrugged. Like we were talking about burning dinner. It was just a one-time thing. I could barely process what I was hearing. You cheated on me. And all you have to say is it meant nothing. Well, yeah, she said like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I was drunk. It was stupid. But it's not a big deal. Not big deal. I had no words, no breath, just a crushing, suffocating weight in my chest. The kind of weight that tells you that nothing will ever be the same again. She watched me, waiting for me to move past it. Like this was just a minor inconvenience, a little hiccup in our marriage that we could brush aside and forget. I let out a slow breath, forcing my voice to stay steady. Who is he? Emily rolled her eyes again, like I was being dramatic. It doesn't matter. Who is he? She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. It's nobody, Matt. Just a guy from work. Look, I'll block him. Okay, it's done. I don't even care about him. A guy from work. My vision blurred at the edges. She was still lying, still downplaying, still treating me like a fool. I took one step closer. She didn't move, didn't shrink away. Instead, she crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. You're overreacting. I came home to you, didn't I? Something inside me snapped. I smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that made her take a step back. You're right, I said quietly. She blinked. What? I nodded, still smiling. You're right. It's not a big deal. Confusion flickered in her eyes. Matt. I turned, walked past her, and grabbed my keys from the dresser. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst, but my hands were steady. Emily frowned. Where are you going? I didn't answer. I walked out, got into my car, drove, and when I came back hours later, Emily walked into an empty house. Emily called me 5 times before I even reached the highway. Each time I let it ring. Each time the silence felt heavier. The woman I had built my life around, the woman I had trusted more than anyone, had just stood there in a towel, telling me her affair was not a big deal. And I had smiled at her, not because I forgave her, not because I had accepted it, but because I had already made a decision. She wanted to act like it was nothing, like she could just brush it off and move on. Fine. Let's see how she handled it when I treated it the same way. By the time I reached the first intersection, my phone buzzed with a text. Emily, come home. Stop being dramatic. Dramatic. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. This wasn't an apology. There was no remorse, no begging, no regret, just annoyance. Emily wasn't afraid of losing me. She wasn't even concerned. In her mind, I would come back eventually. I would swallow it down, push it away, and we would go back to normal, because that's what she had counted on. I took a slow breath and made another decision. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg for an explanation. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a fight. I was going to make her feel what I felt. I turned the car around, not towards home, but towards a 24-hour storage unit on the other side of town. By the time I got there, I already had a plan. Took me 2 hours to clear out everything I had ever brought into that house. My clothes, my electronics, my tools, every piece of furniture that was mine before I met her. The TV, the couch, the bed frame. I left the mattress because that was hers, and I wasn't touching it now that I knew what she had done. I didn't just pack up my things. I took everything that was me out of that house. The coffee mug I used every morning, the pictures of us from years ago, before she turned into this, the little things she would see and realize too late that I was gone. By the time I was done, it was almost dawn, and that's when I left her the note. It was short, just a few words scribbled on the kitchen counter with a marker I found in the drawer. Not a big deal, right? And then I walked out. An hour later, as the sun started creeping up over the horizon, my phone rang again. I didn't answer. Then another text. Emily, what the hell? Matt? I smiled. Now suddenly, it was a big deal. The first call I ignored. The second, I let ring just long enough to hear the sharp edge of panic in Emily's voice before sending it to voicemail. The third came with a text. Emily, were these all your stuff? Not please come back. Not I'm sorry. Not let's talk. Just confusion. Shock. Like it hadn't even crossed her mind that I would actually leave. Like she had assumed I would do what I always did. Take a deep breath, swallow my pride, and let her get away with it. I let her sit with that silence for a while. I parked outside an old diner, one of those places that still smelled like burnt coffee and cigarette smoke, and stared at my phone on the table. I had no appetite, but I ordered something anyway. Watched the steam rise from the mug, the condensation gather on the glass of orange juice. Everything felt sharp. The hum of the overhead lights, the quiet chatter of the couple in the booth behind me, the way my fingers twitched against the table like they needed something to grip. This was real. This was happening. And I had no idea what came next. My phone buzzed again. Emily, where are you? Emily, why are you acting like this? Emily, call me. Now I exhaled slowly, rolling my thumb over the screen, hovering over the call button. And then one last text came in. Emily, stop being a child and come home. A child. Something cold slid through me. I took a sip of my coffee, let the bitterness settle on my tongue. And then, with careful, deliberate movements, I typed out my response. Matt, home. You mean your house? The 3 little dots appeared immediately. Then stopped, started again. Stopped. She didn't know how to answer that. And that told me everything I needed to know. My phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a new text. Emily, oh my God, are you actually leaving me over this? The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. Over this, like she had dropped my favorite coffee mug and cracked it. Like she had forgotten to pick up something from the store. Over this, I left my money on the table, grabbed my keys and walked out. The next call I answered, not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because I wanted her to hear mine. Hello. She snapped the second the call connected. I let the silence stretch out. Let her feel it. Then finally I said, why are you calling me, Emily? That threw her. What? Are you? What the hell do you mean? You left. Matt, I woke up and all your stuff was gone. You're right, I said calmly. I did. A beat of silence. Then are you serious right now? I walked to my car, leaned against it, watching the early morning traffic go by. You said it was no big deal. Emily let out a sharp, frustrated breath. Oh my God, Matt. It wasn't. It was one night. One stupid mistake. So why do you care that I'm gone? She sputtered, like it hadn't even occurred to her that those 2 things didn't add up. You're my husband. I laughed. Couldn't help it. A real sharp, humorless laugh. You don't get to call me that. Her breath caught. Matt. No. I said, cutting her off. You made your choice. You just didn't think I'd make mine. Pause. And then quietly, you're really leaving me. It wasn't a question. It was just realization. And I realized right then that up until that exact moment, she still hadn't believed it. She had thought I was throwing a tantrum, that I just needed time to cool off, that I would come crawling back, because that's what I always did. She hadn't truly believed she was about to lose me. But now she did. And I let that truth settle in her bones before I finally said goodbye, Emily, and hung up. The silence after I hung up was deafening. For the first time in years, I had no obligations. No one waiting for me. No one expecting me to walk through the door. I should have felt free. I should have felt powerful. Instead, I felt hollow. I slid into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. My phone sat on the passenger seat, screen dark, no calls, no messages. I knew Emily wasn't done. I knew she would try again. But in that moment, all I could do was sit in the quiet and let everything crash over me. She cheated. She lied. And when I found out, she had barely flinched. That was the part that wouldn't leave my head. The look on her face when I showed her the messages. The lack of panic. The annoyance, like I was an inconvenience, not a husband. I needed to move. I needed to do something. I started the car and pulled out onto the road. Not sure where I was going, just knowing I couldn't stay still. 15 minutes later, my phone lit up. Emily. I let it ring. Then another, and then a text. Emily, I'm sorry. Okay. Can we just talk? I ignored it. Emily. This is insane. You're throwing away everything over one mistake. That did it. I pulled into a parking lot, threw the car in park, and stared at the message until my vision blurred. I wasn't sure if it was rage or exhaustion or something worse, but my hand started to shake. She still didn't get it. It wasn't about one mistake. It was about who she became the moment I found out. The lying, the downplaying, the sheer lack of respect. I thought about replying. I thought about telling her every single thought running through my head. But then another message came in. Emily, you're being ridiculous. Just come home and let's talk. Just like that. Every ounce of anger I had drained away. Because in that moment, I saw it clearly. She didn't want to fix this. She didn't want to make it right. She just wanted to win. This wasn't about me. It wasn't about our marriage. It was about control. Emily had never expected consequences. She had expected me to be the same man I had always been. The man who forgave, the man who let things go. But that man was gone. And I was about to prove it. I took a slow breath, steadied my hands, and typed out my reply. Matt, I'll be home in an hour. The response was immediate. Emily, finally, I'll be waiting. I put the car back in drive, pulled onto the road, and headed home. But I wasn't coming back to reconcile. I was coming back to end this. When I pulled into the driveway, Emily was already waiting for me. She stood on the front porch, arms crossed, foot tapping against the wooden floorboards like she had been rehearsing her performance in the mirror. Her expression was somewhere between irritation and forced concern. But there was no real panic, no fear. She still thought she had the upper hand. I stepped out of the car slowly, taking my time, watching her. She was in leggings and one of my old sweatshirts, one of the ones she used to steal because she said it smelled like me. Now it just looked like a bad prop, a costume designed to remind me of something we used to be. It wasn't working. You done with your tantrum? She asked the second I was within earshot. I almost laughed. Almost. I walked past her, straight to the front door. Move. Emily frowned. Matt. Move. Something in my voice made her hesitate. She stepped aside, letting me pass. But I could feel her eyes on me as I entered her house. Not mine. Not anymore. The place was just as I left it. Empty. Stripped down to the shell of what it once was. The walls looked bare without the photos. The living room looked smaller without my furniture. The air felt colder, like I had taken the warmth with me when I left. Emily followed me inside, closing the door behind her. Are you done being dramatic? I didn't answer. I walked to the kitchen, picked up the marker I had left on the counter, and wiped away my note with the sleeve of my jacket. Emily sighed behind me. Seriously, you're just going to act like a child now. I turned slowly, leaning against the counter. Tell me something, Emily. I said, my voice calm measured. Was it worth it? She blinked. What? Was it worth it? I repeated. Losing me. Our marriage. Everything we built. Was that one night worth it? She scoffed. Rolled her eyes like I had just asked her something ridiculous. Oh my God, Matt. Stop. It was one night. One mistake. I told you I'm sorry. I don't know what else you want from me. You don't know what I want. Yes. She snapped. I don't. Because none of this makes sense. You're acting like I killed someone. I slept with another guy one time. And suddenly you're acting like our entire marriage was a lie. I tilted my head, studying her. Tell me the truth, Emily. She frowned. I am telling the truth. No. I said, voice still steady. You're not. Because if you were, you wouldn't be this angry. You wouldn't be this defensive. Her eyes flickered. Matt, you're mad because I wasn't supposed to find out. You're mad because you didn't think I would do anything about it. She let out a short, humorless laugh. Oh my God, you're insane. Am I? I took a slow step forward, watching her carefully. Tell me, Emily, if it was really just one night, why do you care this much? Why are you fighting this hard? She opened her mouth, closed it. And that's when I saw it. The crack, the tiny flicker of fear behind her eyes. The first real sign that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as stupid as she thought I was. I smiled, a slow, knowing smile. It wasn't just one night. Was it? Her breath hitched. Matt, how long? I asked. She shook her head. It doesn't matter how long, she exhaled sharply, looking away. It was a couple of times. Okay, I let the silence stretch, let her sit in it. Then I took another step forward, dropping my voice. How many? She swallowed hard. Matt, how many times, Emily? She finally looked at me. And for the first time since this started, I saw real guilt on her face. 5. I let out a slow breath. Not because I was shocked. I wasn't, but because hearing her say it made it real in a way nothing else had. 5 times. She had looked me in the eyes for months, kissed me, slept next to me, told me she loved me while going behind my back 5 times. And she had called it a mistake. I nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me the truth. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Matt, I pulled my wedding ring off my finger and set it on the counter. Her breath caught. Wait, this is done, Emily. She stared at the ring like it was a grenade. Like it was something dangerous, something that could still be stopped if she just said the right thing. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she looked afraid. Not of losing me, of losing control. You don't mean that, she whispered. I gave her one last look, memorizing the face of the woman I once loved. I do. And then I walked out, leaving her standing there alone in her house, that I barely heard the door click shut behind me before Emily exploded. Matt, she screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet morning air. I kept walking, footsteps fast. She was running after me. Matt, stop. You're not doing this. You're not just. I turned slowly. She stumbled to a stop at the bottom of the porch steps, her breath heaving, panic creeping into her expression. You're not leaving, she said, voice shaking now. We're going to talk about this like adults. I exhaled a short laugh. Talk like adults. Like how you talk to Nick, her face twisted. That's not fair. Fair, I repeated, stepping closer. You want to talk about fair? She swallowed, looked away. I don't. No. I cut her off, voice cold. You don't. You don't want to talk. You want me to forget. Emily flinched. She knew I was right. For a long moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. The wind kicked up, rustling the trees, carrying the distant hum of morning traffic from the main road. Then, she crossed her arms, clenching her jaw. I don't get why you're doing this. A slow, sharp smile spread across my face. You still don't get it, do you? She hesitated, just for a second. But it was enough. I shook my head. You thought I'd be mad. Thought I'd yell. Thought I'd break something. Maybe leave for a few hours just to cool off. Then I'd come back, and we'd go through the motions. You'd cry. Swear it was a mistake. And I'd take you back. Because that's what I've always done. Right? Her lips parted, but no words came out. You never believed I'd actually walk away. I tilted my head, watching her squirm. You're not upset about what you did. You're upset because you miscalculated. Her entire face hardened. You're an asshole. I grinned. There it is. The mask had finally slipped. The sweet, remorseful act was gone. And in its place was the real Emily. The Emily who never thought she'd face consequences. The Emily who saw me as something she controlled. And for the first time in years, she knew she had lost. She tried one last time. Her posture softened. Her voice wavered. Matt, please. We can fix this. I stared at her. Let her desperation sink in. Let her see that there was nothing left. Then, in the calmest voice I had ever spoken in my life, I said, No, Emily, you can live with it. I turned open my car door and got in. She didn't chase me this time. I don't know how long she stood there, watching, waiting, hoping I would change my mind. But as I pulled out of the driveway, the last thing I saw in the rearview mirror was Emily, frozen, speechless, and for the first time in her life, powerless. That I drove. Not to anywhere in particular, just away, away from that house, away from her voice, away from the last 7 years of my life that had just gone up in flames. I should have felt something: relief, maybe victory, satisfaction. But all I felt was empty. The city blurred past my windows, streetlights, cars, people living their lives, completely unaware that mine had just shattered. It was surreal, like watching a movie where the main character loses everything, except this wasn't fiction. This was real. My phone sat face down on the passenger seat, vibrating every few minutes. Emily. I ignored every call, every text, every attempt to pull me back in. I don't know how long I drove before I finally pulled into a random parking lot, killing the engine. The silence that followed was suffocating. The weight of everything crashed down all at once. I had nothing, no home, no wife, no plan. All I had was a storage unit full of my things and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Another call, another text. Emily, you're being a coward, running away like this instead of facing what happened. I almost laughed. Coward, that was rich coming from her. I stared at the message, feeling something dark curl in my chest. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't regretting. She was just angry that she couldn't manipulate me. And yet she still thought she could win. Emily, you're going to regret this. You're going to wake up and realize you threw away a marriage over one stupid mistake. One mistake. Even after admitting to 5 different betrayals, she was still trying to rewrite reality. Still pretending this was just some minor hiccup in our perfect love story. I ran a hand down my face, exhaling slowly. My pulse was steady. My breathing was even. And then, just as I was about to put my phone down, another message came in. Emily, I bet Nick treated me better than you ever did. I froze. The air in the car shifted. She had spent all this time trying to reel me back in, trying to play the victim. But now that she knew it wasn't working, she was going for blood. Emily, at least he made me feel wanted. When was the last time you did that? Something inside me snapped. Not anger, not pain, clarity. I typed out my response, my finger steady. Matt, you're right. I should have made you feel wanted. If I had, maybe you wouldn't have had to throw yourself at some desperate loser from your office. The dots appeared instantly. Stopped. Peered again. Emily, you don't get to talk to me like that. I smiled. Matt, what are you going to do? Emily, cheat on me. Silence. Then Emily, you Matt already did. But apparently I wasn't the only one. No response. Nothing. I could almost picture her staring at her phone, seething for the first time since this entire nightmare started. I felt good. Emily had spent months making a fool out of me, lying to me, laughing behind my back. And now she was getting a taste of what it felt like to be powerless to lose. I put my phone down, leaned back in the seat, and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I finally felt like myself again. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. I had finally crashed at a cheap motel just outside the city, some rundown place that smelled like cigarettes and bad decisions. The bed was stiff. The walls were thin, but I didn't care. I just needed somewhere to stop. Somewhere Emily wasn't. But when I checked my phone, it was clear she had spent all night trying to pull me back into her storm. 27 missed calls, 53 texts. I sighed, scrolling through the madness. At first, she had stuck to the same script. Emily, come home. Let's talk. Emily, you're ruining everything over nothing. Emily, you're acting crazy. Just pick up the phone. Then when I didn't respond, she shifted. Emily, you want to act like you're the victim. After everything I put up with from you. Emily, you're not some perfect husband, Matt. Maybe if you'd paid more attention, I wouldn't have needed someone else. Emily, you think you're so righteous. You think leaving makes you a good guy. Newsflash, it just makes you weak. By the time she realized none of it was working, the messages got desperate. Emily, I didn't mean any of that. Please, Matt, I need to see you. Emily, I messed up. I know I did. Just give me one chance to fix this. Emily, I love you. Please don't do this. I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing my temples. This was predictable. The anger, the insults, the sudden regret when she realized I wasn't playing the game anymore. I had seen through her and she hated it. Then, just as I was about to block her number, I saw the last message. Emily, I told my parents you left me. They're furious. I stared at the screen, a slow smirk creeping onto my face. Of course, she ran to them. Emily had always known how to play the victim. And if she couldn't manipulate me, she'd go for someone else. Her parents had always thought the world of me, her dad especially, the man who shook my hand on our wedding day and said, "Take care of my little girl." What would he think if he knew what she had done? I tapped out her response. Matt, did you tell them why? A minute passed. Then another. Then Emily, don't you dare. I laughed. There it was. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't heartbroken. She was terrified. Terrified that the truth would finally come out. That the perfect little world she had built around herself, the world where she was the flawless, innocent wife, and I was the unreasonable, heartless husband, would shatter. I stretched, grabbed my jacket, and stood up. If Emily wanted to drag people into this, fine. Let's see how she liked it when the whole story came out. Emily had always been good at spinning stories, twisting reality until it suited her. She could cry on command, turn a minor inconvenience into a personal tragedy, and make herself the victim in any situation. But she made one fatal mistake. She underestimated me. By the time I pulled into her parents' driveway, my phone was already blowing up. More texts, more missed calls. Emily had figured out what I was doing. Emily, Matt, don't. I swear to God, don't do this. Emily, I will never forgive you if you tell them. Emily, you're being cruel. We can fix this, just. I shut off my phone and stepped out of the car. I wasn't here to fight. I wasn't here to yell or throw blame. I was here to do one thing, end the lie. The front door swung open before I even knocked. Emily's mother, Susan, stood in the doorway. Eyes red-rimmed, face tight with barely restrained anger. She had clearly been crying, probably all morning. The second she saw me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Matt, she said, her voice cold, come inside. I nodded, stepping past her into the house. The air was thick with tension, the kind that wrapped around your throat like a noose. Emily's father, Richard, was standing by the fireplace, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. I had always respected the man. He was quiet but firm, someone who believed in responsibility and accountability, which is why I knew exactly what Emily had told them. She had painted herself as the abandoned wife, the devoted spouse who had made one tiny mistake, only to be cast aside by a heartless, unforgiving husband. She hadn't told them the real story. Sit, Susan said sharply, motioning to the couch. I sat. She stood in front of me, arms crossed, eyes flashing with anger. I cannot believe you, Matt. I said nothing, just waited. How could you do this? She continued, voice shaking. Just pack up and leave like that, without even trying to work it out. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. Then, slowly, I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. What exactly did Emily tell you? I asked. Susan scoffed. That you left. That you refused to talk. That she made a mistake, and instead of giving her a chance, you just walked out. I nodded. And did she tell you what that mistake was? Silence. A long silence. Susan faltered. She said it was something small, that she kissed someone, that it didn't mean anything. I exhaled slowly. Is that what she told you? Another silence. This time Richard spoke. His voice was deep, calm, but there was an edge to it. What really happened, Matt? I looked him straight in the eye. She slept with a guy from her office 5 times, lied to me about it, and when I found out, she said it wasn't a big deal. Susan paled. That's not true. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the messages and showed them. Let them read her own words. I watched as the blood drained from Susan's face, as her mouth opened, then closed, as if she wanted to defend her daughter, but couldn't. Richard, on the other hand, just stood there, silent, expressionless. Then, after a long moment, he exhaled. I should have known, he muttered. Susan turned to him, eyes wide. Richard. No, he said, shaking his head. Don't. You know, as well as I do, that Emily's never been able to take responsibility for anything in her life. He looked at me then, his gaze heavy. I'm sorry, Matt. I truly am. I nodded. I'm not here for an apology. I just didn't want you believing a lie. Susan looked like she might burst into tears. I just don't understand. She was so angry when she told us. She really made it seem like you were the one overreacting. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. Of course she did. Emily wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She was just mad that she had finally lost control. I stood up. I should go. Richard nodded, but Susan still looked shaken, like she was struggling to process it all. I didn't expect them to cut her off. She was their daughter. But now at least they knew the truth. And that was enough. I walked to the door, stepped outside and stopped because parked at the curb, waiting for me was Emily. She was leaning against her car, arms crossed, eyes locked onto mine the second I stepped outside. Her face was unreadable, but the tension in her body told me everything I needed to know. Emily wasn't here to apologize. She was here to win. I shut the door behind me, taking my time as I walked toward her. She stayed still, watching, waiting, probably expecting me to snap, to yell, to break. I didn't. I stopped a few feet away, tilting my head slightly. You waiting for something? Her jaw clenched. What did you tell them? I smirked the truth. Her nostrils flared. You had no right to do that. I let out a short laugh. No right. I gestured back toward the house. You dragged them into this, Emily. You ran to them hoping they'd back you up. You just didn't expect them to hear both sides. A flicker of something crossed her face. Panic. It was gone just as fast. Buried under the anger. You just couldn't help yourself. Could you? You had to make me the villain. I shook my head slowly. I didn't have to do anything. You did that all on your own. She took a step closer, her voice lowering. You don't get to do this, Matt. You don't get to act like you're some perfect, innocent victim. I raised an eyebrow. Did I cheat on you 5 times? Her lips pressed into a thin line. That's what I thought. She exhaled sharply, pacing in a tight circle before turning back to me. This isn't you. I frowned. Excuse me. This, she snapped, gesturing at me. This whole cold, petty, vindictive act. This isn't who you are. I stared at her for a long moment. And then I smiled. That's the problem, isn't it? I said quietly. You thought I'd always be the same. Emily's expression flickered. You thought I'd yell, get mad, leave, but come back. I took a step forward, closing the gap between us. You thought you could lie to my face, cheat on me, humiliate me. And I just forgive you. She opened her mouth. But I wasn't finished. You never believed there'd be a day where I'd look at you and feel nothing. The color drained from her face. I let the silence stretch, let her feel the weight of what I had just said. And then finally I exhaled. But here we are. She swallowed hard. Matt. No, I shook my head. This conversation over her hands balled into fists at her sides. You can't just walk away from this. I laughed. Actually laughed. Emily, I already did. And then I turned, walked to my car, and opened the door. But just before I got in, she spoke again. You'll regret this. I paused, looked over my shoulder at her. Emily's face was tight with anger. Her arms crossed again. but her eyes were glassy, like she had just realized this was really happening, like she had finally figured out that she had played her game too well. I studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "No," I said simply, "I won't." And with that, I got in my car, shut the door, and drove away. For the first time in years, I was free.